and assimilation that still impact many Indigenous Native American families today. As settlers and guests on these lands, we respect the work of Native nations, leaders, and families, and make ongoing efforts to center Indigenous knowledge, creativity, resilience, and resistance. Now I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Analia Segal. Segal's work bridges sculpture and design, employs video, and speaks to the complexities of domestic space and political conditions that shape experience and memory. Tonight, Segal will discuss her practice and present a selection of works produced during the last 20 years, comprised in her recent bilingual book object, El Interior del Interior. The project attempts to plumb the intricacy and complexity of citizenship and dislocation. Segal has exhibited extensively nationally and internationally, including a recent solo exhibition at the Aldrich Contemporary Art Museum. Other exhibitions include Gallery Copochica in Tokyo, Japan, PS1 MoMA in Long Island City, New York, DPM Gallery in Guayaquil, Ecuador, Gallery Tupper Poppermeyer in Teckomatorp, Sweden, Musea de Arte Moderno in Buenos Aires, Weatherspoon Art Museum in Greensboro, North Carolina, and White Columns, New York, just to name a few. She is a recipient of the Guggenheim Fellowship and a Pollock-Krasner Award. Her work is in public collections, including El Museo del Barrio in New York, Plantin Museum of Art in Austin, Texas, and Museo de Arte Moderno de Buenos Aires. Segal has a master's degree in studio art from Steinhardt, from the School of Culture, Education, and Human Development from New York University, and a bachelor's degree in graphic design from Universidad de Buenos Aires in Argentina. If you have any questions, there will be a Q&A at the end.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to be sharing my screen. I would like to thank everyone for being here, and especially MK for inviting me, and Sharita to present my work tonight and share with you. As Elizabeth said, I will be covering a selection of works that I have done for the last 20 years since I moved to New York from Argentina. And I always starts talks by showing an image of a hornero, which is the national bird from Argentina, because it's a bird that makes this incredible nest, obviously foraging the things that he has around him to create this beautiful object that he installs where he feels safe. And I think that also what the other important component and the interest that I have in this object is not only that it is a beautiful metaphor for the idea of home, but also this idea that the hornero lays the eggs in this nest only one time and then leaves it behind for others to inhabit it. And so I just find it an incredible metaphor for a work of art. I decided also to looked back at my work as I was putting together this talk, and I realized that I wanted to map out the ideas. And as you can see, it's not really a straight line. And so I'll be happy to be interrupted by questions, but also take you to this very sort of convoluted experience of being and belonging, and realizing how the ideas are constantly coming back to the work in many different ways. And so I decided to start the talk tonight with images of a work that I did as a result of the experience of isolation through COVID, and start with the present moment, because I feel that we are clearly in a very unique global event that has changed the way we experience everything around us. Clearly, notions of time and space and dislocation, and the fact that I'm talking to you through a screen and imagining faces and bodies in different places. And so I just want to share this work that is one of the 5 bodies of work that I developed in the last year since COVID started. So this piece was created using images from a selection or a collection of images that I took, photographs that I took for the first time using my own body while at an artist residency in Captiva Island, organized by the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation in 2019. And when I was there, one of the unique characteristics of this place is that Rauschenberg had bought a house that is on stilts in the middle of a bay. And I was really interested in this idea of the home on the body and the relationship, the unique relationship of the water in this space. And so that has been the basis for, like I said, like 5 different bodies of work that I used. And in this case, it was an incredible opportunity to rethink time in relationship to these issues. So going back to the beginning, somehow, one of the things that struck me when I moved to New York was being able to hear my neighbors. Growing up in Argentina, everything was built with bricks and supposed to last. So architecture had a very different meaning, and I had a very different experience of what the idea of home was. And coming to New York, I was really shocked by the marks left behind by the people in all this, the 10 different apartments that I lived for the first 10 years. I was literally moving once a year, like most people, because of the cost of rents and the small spaces. And so I started developing what I call survival skills in order to create my work and start thinking about it in a different way than I was while I was in Argentina, because of thinking how the lack of space actually became a very important challenge for me. And I started to think about architecture as a place that could give me the possibility to rethink and integrate it into my work and to create a dialogue. So I started using molds and casting pieces that I was including on the walls themselves. So they will, they will speak of this idea of the markings that people were living and the rubbing, and thinking that that became a tool for sculpting the environment that we have. And I felt that the wall became a skin and a very sensual material in a way. And so that I started manipulating and appropriating the space in many different ways. As you can see, this is the second time I'm showing a video of myself walking. And the reason is because as part of my practice, I realized throughout the last 20 years how ideas actually were something that were coming to me, not as I was sitting down in my studio necessarily, but when I was able to be in transit and I started to think about this idea of walking and thinking, obviously historically related. And it became a very important part of the process of the work, that it was, thinking about, how I connect spaces somehow. So as part of this series of wall interventions, I started using only the edges of different architectural spaces to soften the architecture and think how, we sort of appropriate the space in a very instinctual way and make something long-lasting like architectural something porous, and also thinking of the idea, as I said before, that the wall became the skin, that it could speak, it could protect us, but it could also hide things. So that brought me back to memories I had growing up in Argentina, where, like I said, the use of materials was very different. And I was always fascinated by all this transformation that was taking place, as a result of the interaction with the bodies. After a couple of years of working with the installations on directly on the walls with plaster, that also the other opportunity that gave me was that because I was working with molds, I could transport the work easily, and I was in direct dialogue with the exhibition spaces or any place where the work needed to be installed. I was using what I call architectural accidents and understanding the floor plan as this way of navigating the space. So they will have a relationship to everything that we'll encounter, from outlets to columns, molds, everything that was part of the interior design and the architecture, and the work will have a conversation with that. And after working directly on the walls, as I said, I started to think about other materials that were part of the interior design and the architecture, and tiles became this other element that became relevant. I was always interested in the idea of the tiles as, there's a book by Ellen Lupton that is The History of the Bathroom and Kitchens, where she says that the bathroom is a place that, even if it could be physically clean, is culturally dirty. And I was really struck by that quote and that idea, and also being in New York City, where subway stations are covered with tiles, I started to think about that as another possibility of another covering. And thinking of translating what I was doing in the walls, initially in the walls, into the tiles, and using the grid as this other conversation of this other idea of the survival mechanism that I was developing in order to create my work. So I worked with a company in Mexico, in Guadalajara, that they will produce the tiles because obviously they had different thicknesses and different challenges in terms of being produced, and think of them in an installation as a grid, and as a thinking how to create these compositions. The shapes coming or being produced are usually just, for me, markings that are a result of this interaction. I don't work obviously with any figurative ideas in mind, but they do have a very deep relationship with the body, because they're triggered by the notion of touch somehow. So I think that I work with in mind, regardless of any material, with the idea of something haptic and conceptual at the same time. And that's what it's helping me translate those concepts into any kind of material. So the idea of wallpaper obviously came after thinking of this notion of covering and what other materials are used. And so I created this other installation that is called Implosion. And I realized also that at this point that titles had a very important, they became very important in the work. And so they always related to the experience of the interior space, and thinking that home became important in my life only once I left it. So I think of it as a paradox promise or paradoxical experience that we have, right? That when we are at home or in the location, we don't necessarily think about it, but it becomes significant once you leave. And so in this case, the installation, it's made out of, they're photographs of wallpapers that I kept, and I added digitally elements of interior design, like molding, like I said before, outlets or nails in the wall, and they're distributed throughout the room in this sort of way that it feels like it has exploded, but there are different sizes, so you can never actually put it back together. And one of the things that happened is, like, as I was working in these different materials, the work started to talk to each other and to have this conversation with each other. So I started combining the installations with photographs and with the wall interventions at the same time, creating, different kinds of what I call, intimate conversations. And I think that one of the things that shifted was, for many years, people were asking me why my work was always white. And I actually didn't have an answer for it, except for, I think that in that quest of finding a sense of belonging, I was just trying to blend into the surroundings that I was experiencing or giving the possibility to exhibit. And most walls were actually white. When I had a possibility to use color, I actually went for the opposite, that was red. And I became very interested in red as this archetypical color and the symbolic qualities that it had, and the history of red in many ways. And so the other thing that started to happen, in the work with time, was that as part of my experience of and this quest of finding a sense of belonging, I started to have a conversation with art history and especially figures within art history that I was, I got my master's at NYU. So they were like all these artists that I was introduced to in many, different ways. And I felt that it was important for me to create a dialogue, although at the same time, I had a level of resistance to certain ideas, or I had a relationship that I felt like it was kind of not passive. So I think of this works as conversations that they clearly sort of emasculate or challenge certain status quo. And, although I am kind of interested in the reductive language or vocabulary of some of these works. And I think that also the relationship or the way I experienced this had to do with my upbringing. I grew up in Argentina in the 1970s under military government. And so the notion of latency and the unspoken was something very prevalent. The legacy of fear that I grew up with, I think that it's deeply rooted in a lot of the work that in my experience of the world, certainly growing up. And so I was always interested in this idea, I think, in the work also of the iceberg, and thinking that what we're actually looking at is a very small gesture. It's a small section of something that we know that it is much larger. But at the same time, I think that it's only a question of time, but we can certainly defrost an iceberg by licking it. So I'm interested in this idea of persistence and then holding on a gesture throughout a very long period of time, and thinking that the transformation happened that way. And for me, that is both, you know, seductive, but, you know, and a unique way of dealing with violence at the same time. And so again, moving on to this idea of home, the other thing that I was struck by being in the US was the notions of doormats. That it was something that I never encountered before. And I was really fascinated by this very small object and the entrance of a lot of different houses, and thinking that industrial design object can hold a promise. And so I created a whole series of doormats where I actually included these rubber casting pieces underneath, so they literally could make you trip. And I called this series Homesick Home. And I created a series with in collaboration with a company that was making the doormats, and I used what it was available in terms of the colors and the rugs that it was available to them, and they facilitated that. And this was a time when I started looking at the floor in a different way. I think that after many years of working directly on the walls, somebody said to me many years that when you don't know a place, when you're a tourist and when you're new to a place, you always look up, because you're also trying to understand where you're at and embrace everything around you. And when you think that you know a place, you look down, because you're just like thinking about your destination. And so I find that sort of very interesting in terms of how we relate the body and the experience of the body in relationship to space. And so I created this other series of floor installations with carpet tiles. And again, thinking about these conversations with our historical figures, I call this series Carl. And they are literally pieces of rubber coming from under the rugs to, like I said before, emasculating or challenge the ideas behind this work. And the other project that I created in relationship to rugs and floors was after I got a commission from a company based in Argentina to design a collection of rugs. And I became very interested in that concept. And I started to think about what a rug was actually for me. And I realized that I grew up with a cowhide as the rug. And so that was also a very close relationship between an industrial design object that had a certain function and a relationship to the body. So all the designs that I created had a resonance to that concept. And I have been using them in many different ways. I usually try to also work in series, and then the work ends up being part of many different projects in different ways. So as I said before, in the research of thinking about rugs, I was really interested in not only the practical use of the rugs, but also the symbolic use of it, and throughout history and different places. And I was the relationship that I had also was very important of Freud's couch, given that in Buenos Aires there are more therapists than almost in Paris and New York. So it was very close relationship that I had somehow in my experience of rugs. So as Elizabeth said in the presentation, I had my last solo show at the Aldrich Museum in 2018, where I had the opportunity to show a whole body of work together for the first time in a long time. And that was an amazing opportunity. And so the title of the show was Contra la pared, that it's against the wall, but it's also the feeling of being sheltered and cornered. And so I literally created different works specifically to deal with the architecture in the space, and other projects that I had worked before, and together they actually became part of this exhibition. So what we're seeing now is the glass doors that as you will enter into the show, that I covered with design of a wallpaper cutout with vinyl that people can actually see inside, because from technical reason I needed to make the space darker because I was showing video, and then at the same time became this very interesting element to create a peephole kind of experience. And then the other element that I used was a rug. That, as I said before, is they take different lives in different projects. And so in this case, the room was a very big rectangular space, very open, and I felt that I wanted people to walk around it in a different way. I kind of have a little bit of a control of how the people were experiencing the show, to pace them as they were walking through them. And so I created this rug also specifically for this show, and it had 150 pieces of yarn threaded from the base of the rug all the way up to the ceiling. And it created a very interesting object because first it took away the idea of the rug as a functional object within the context of the exhibition, and then it became this very intrusive object with metaphorical qualities of some kind of a cage, column, etc. That was very fragile at the same time, because they were only pieces of yarn, but it forced the body to walk around it before entering the show. So the other works that I showed in this exhibition were a trilogy of video animations that became very important after over 10 years of being in the US, where I started to feel that I was actually dreaming in English, and I was talking to myself in English. I found one day, I remember I was crossing the street, and I remember hearing myself saying, "Watch out to me," which it felt incredibly strange. And so I realized that my three-dimensional work was not actually speaking the same or having the same bilingual inner dialogue that I was having in my head. And that's when I actually started to deal with the idea of video and video animation, and using language learning audiobooks to write stories. So what I showed at the show at the Aldrich was a trilogy. That was the first video work I created. That it's a series called Inland. And what I did was I rewrote 3 stories, or I edited words, as I said, from language learning audiobooks to learn both English and Spanish. And I took the 3 iconic fairy tales, the 3 Little Pigs, the Ugly Duckling, and Little Red Riding Hood. And I wrote 3 different stories, keeping the core of each of these fairy tales, but in a way addressing larger issues. So I'm going to show you 3 excerpts of each of the videos.
Lunes, miércoles,
Today,
jueves,
tomorrow,
viernes,
the next day,
sábado, domingo,
who's there?
enero, febrero,
This year,
marzo, abril,
the next year,
julio,
this
agosto,
and piso, doors and windows,
octubre, noviembre, diciembre.
So As I said before, in this idea of editing language learning audiobooks, I created this sort of idiosyncratic language where I decided not to use translation, but combine words from each language as sound somehow to create a soundscape. And I became very interested in the idea of language as a device for inclusion and exclusion. And that was also part of not using translation or any kind of grammatical structure. And I also feel that each language has the ability, every language has the ability to transport us in an emotional way. And then at the same time, I think that it was important for me to keep the idea of being a foreigner or an outsider. And so I created this unique economy between words and images where things were also being communicated outside of understanding the exact meaning of the work. And the way that I work with language, or I think of language, is a very similar way as I use the grid somehow, that it's a place for me to push back or to resist. Although I understand that it's a way of where we hope that we can actually communicate. Although I think that what is clear is that it's a failed system of communication, or it's certainly not enough. So I'm going to show you excerpts of the other two.
¿La prisa? Aquí. Ahí. No, not like that. Like this. Ahora. Ahora no. Oh no. Enough. Enough. It's never enough. Ten cuidado. This is not the right road.
Tap, tap. Who's there?
Me. Why me? Why me? Why are you doing this to me? No entiendo. No comprendo. No quiero olvidar. Let it go. Let it go. Just say no.
Why you are so happy? Who is there?
What great arms you have. What great ears you have. What great eyes you have.
What great teeth you have.
What are you looking at? And what are you doing in my bed? ¿Cuándo vuelves por aquí? ¿Qué te muestra el espejo?
Tap, tap. Who is there?
Una mujer. ¿Cuál? ¿Cuál? Can you keep my secret? ¿Quién es? ¿Quién es? Es. Eso es un misterio.
Oh, baby.
Oh, baby. Baby or no baby?
Apúrate.
Don't arrive late. What do you need? What are you looking for? What are the things that really matter to you? Someone, something. What are my choices? Something. Someplace.
Tap, tap. Who's there?
Una esposa. Una casa. Aspire la alfombra.
Exercise.
Barra el piso.
Make time.
Lave las ventanas. Revuelva la sopa.
Stay home. Work every single day. Who's working harder?
This is not correct.
What's your problem?
I'm scared. Tú puedes hacer.
So I became very interested in the idea of fairy tales as this literary form, obviously related to the home. And I realized also, as I was listening to the language learning audiobooks, I was interested in the idea of the enunciation and the use of how the voice was used in teaching or learning this audio books as mandates, which I just thought it was incredibly disturbing in a way, and I felt it had a lot to do with, for me, with the idea of the fairy tales, of thinking that it's both a place for fantasy and dreaming, and but at the same time of nightmares, and it was really the place of between reality and fiction. So obviously they're more like poetic constructions somehow. I've always been interested in concrete poetry, and I think of them as they're clearly not linear stories, but I think that there's an incredible interesting dialogue between or economy, as I said before, between the images and the words that create another meaning, and that the viewer can actually make their own story as they're listening to them. So I'll just share the last excerpt of the trilogy.
There is a new one.
A new one has arrived.
¿Cuál?
¿Cuál? ¿Cuál? This one. That one. That one over there.
Who?
Ooh. Oh, wow. Oh.
Esta.
Aquel. Aquellos.
Which one? Which ones?
The other. The other one. You.
You are ugly. Ugly and hateful to look at.
Burro. Bestia.
Bobo.
Bruto. Loser.
Target is online.
And I was always interested in feedback I got from somebody working at the museum, that they had to listen to this over and over again through the length of the show. And this person said to me that the experience was like being in a coffee shop and listening to the conversation of the people sitting at the table next to them, that you don't really understand what it's about, but you figure out, or you create a story of, and to find meaning of what they're saying. Sorry. So I always thought that was very interesting. I always thought of these videos as being part of an architectural space. So I think of them as windows somehow. So they were projected at a very large scale. And what I also did is they're 10 minutes long, each of them. And for me, it's important that people actually pause and sit and have an experience in time with them. I think video work also has that demand. And so I created this series of benches or seats for people to sit, that they were altered in a similar way as I was doing with the tiles. So people will find these strange shapes as they were moving their bodies or being sit on these benches. And the other thing that I did is that I added molding as somehow of a frame for the videos. And so it created this disconcerting experience between the two-dimensional quality of the video projections and the 3D molding basically sticking out, that I felt it was also interesting in the installation, and the other aspect of the installation was this carpet edge all around the show. So it created also a sense of dislocation. People didn't know it was coming in or going out. And for me, that idea of when, feeling that there's something happening to the experience of being grounded was being kind of shaken was important. And again, bringing it up with the notion of home and what does it mean, or to question the notion of home as only as shelter. So the show actually gave me an incredible opportunity, which was to collaborate with the performer and interdisciplinary artist David Thompson. And we worked together and developed this piece called Spinning a Yarn, and that it was part of a closing event of the show. And so I created this wearable sculptural object using boning, that is the material usually used in corsets and dresses that actually constrain the body. And in this case, I created this, what we ended up calling a blanket that will be reshaped in relationship to his body and the movements. And we generated a conversation about domestic rituals and movements. And so we started that project as part of the exhibition, and we hopefully are thinking of continuing and have different versions of this or different iterations of this experience, which was incredible. And it again, it was the first time I was actually using a real human body in my work, and I think that it created a big impact for me. Because until that moment, it was all about the absence of the body and the idea of the mark as being what is left behind, and also as a way in this quest of finding a sense of belonging. It was the idea of marking was a way of acknowledging a presence or an existence. And the other piece actually as part of this installation was the one all the way in the back on the red wall. That piece is called Blind Volumes. And that is a piece that I created thinking of Borges, the Argentinian writer, and an incredible moment in his life where he was named the director of the National Library, and at the same time he was becoming blind. And he actually wrote an incredible essay that's called On Blindness, obviously thinking talking about blindness not as a disability but as an incredible opportunity. And I was always struck by that story, but also this idea of overcoming challenges and finding different ways of doing things. And so this piece for me speaks of that, and it speaks of the idea of volumes, both as this sort of abstracted bookcase, but at the same time with some kind of rhythm that it included these three-dimensional objects being altered, but at the same time traces that there were drawings directly on the walls of these possible books or things being taken away, thinking about what happens to books with no words, banned books, etc. And I think that it created also some kind of musical writing on the wall. And thinking of the books as notes and silences. And obviously at the same time I was working on this piece, I was working on my own book that was a result of actually a question from a talk I was giving in Argentina, where somebody asked me what project I wanted to do at that time that I have never done before. And I decided to say something that it sounded crazy at the time. And I said I wanted to write a book before I turned 50. And then when I came to New York, I was really thinking about what a book meant for me. And I realized that actually I'm a graphic designer by trade. That was my BFA degree. And I never did anything in graphic design until that moment. And when I was really thinking about what a book meant, that it was also not only an opportunity for me to write my own history or tell my own story, occupies a space in different places from a physical point of view, and thinking of the book as this body that will have a dialogue with other books. And what was happening was, like, it was at that time close to 20 years that I have left Argentina, and so there were a lot of people that probably knew about my work, but they didn't know me. And I felt like it was an incredible opportunity to think that I could occupy that space somehow in a different way. And also thinking about the written word and objects and the power that had in many different ways, that I think that it was something that I didn't acknowledge in my education or my background in graphic design. And obviously in the last year, there have been many events that made that even more prevalent. So I lower the volume of this, so that's how the book came about. This project that ended up started as a very small idea, and then it actually took me 5 years to make. And when I started to think about to write a book, I realized that was, at that time, it was definitely something I didn't feel like I could do. Writing was not something I felt comfortable with. I didn't feel like it was the medium I could use, or clearly I didn't feel like I had much of a voice at that time. And so what I did was I asked curators, art historians, and people that knew my work or they were familiar with my work to write about the work from very different points of view. And some of the essays actually they will talk to each other or show different sides of it. And I became very interested in this idea of a chorus that all of them had. There are 9 essays written by, as I said, curators or historians or galleries from both the US and Argentina. So I started to think about the book as this bridge that will create for me the possibility to connect different things and also think of the work in a kaleidoscopic way. So each of the essays really explores very different possibilities or ideas behind the work. After making the book, I just felt like the physical object became a very important possibility for me, but the book presentations in general were incredibly boring. And so I thought that translating the book experience into a video animation was something that became very important. And in the process of doing that, I discovered what time was giving to this experience. And one was this idea of beginning and ending on a regular basis or all the time, right? So the idea of that I could go back to the blank page and that things were being formed, and it was something very important. And that's how this video animation came about. The other thing was, I think that it reveals a different way of thinking. Obviously, in the book, I decided that the images of the work were not just documentation of the work, but I started to use the page as space. So they were all digitally altered to be really linked to the page in different ways. And I created elements that what I think is using the language of graphic design, like you see the page numbers, and they became more about tracing or acknowledging where you're at, but showing the pages before and the page after. So they're, speak a little bit about location. So I felt like I was able to translate this language that has unique qualities also into the work. That were very important basis for me to reveal also ways of thinking, thinking how the grid and, how I utilize all these different elements and how somehow they all became together. I think that the book became a big frame for it and a catalyst for me to think that it was not an ending. Somebody actually asked me if, I thought of the book as some kind of a big show or some kind of a retrospective, that it was a culmination of a certain experience, and actually became more of a springboard, an incredible possibility to think about what's next and what I was going to do from all what I've learned from that in the future. And it has informed every other project that I've been working on since then. So this is a very long animation. I'm not sure how we're in time, and but I guess I can move on unless I get some information. So I'm showing at the end this new video animation, but also I started as a result of COVID and the isolation. Like I said before, I felt that the outside silence and the streets in Brooklyn triggered deep listening in many different ways. And obviously I felt like I was in a very privileged situation that I could reflect on that for a very long period of time, and created what I think of it as new ways of being or engaging with the world. And so I have 5 new bodies of work that I feel that they were pushed forward or triggered mostly by that experience. And this is a series called Digital Haikus. And so I'll show this first. So as I said before, I became very interested in the relationship between words and breath, and also the idea of haikus as this relationship to nature and process, the notion of contemplation, the relationship between the inside and the outside, also as part of this experience of being at home so much, and knowing that there were a lot of things still happening, even if nobody was actually watching, became very interesting as a concept. And at the same time, I realized that my connection to the world, that would happen to most people, was through social media. And I was really trying to understand why people were sending each other messages, poems, songs, and sharing, that kind of experiences, and as a way of connecting. And so I felt like this series is giving me the possibility. It is a series that I designed specifically thinking about Instagram and thinking about this idea of sharing and time within social media. Although it can be translated into different things given the context, but I felt that the 1 minute experience became something that I'm interested in exploring. The framework and the format of social media is something that I'm also interested in to think about what it is. And I think that 1 minute, it is almost a subversive notion given the 8 seconds sort of attention span that everybody has on social media. And so I felt like it was a transgressive possibility to use that environment for something else, and to kind of to think about poetry and breathing, and how we relate to this outside world while being in this little box that we have under the screen that becomes both a window and a mirror. So this is the last work that I want to share tonight, because, and that's why, like I said before, it's been a very long journey and very convoluted one, as you saw, and the way I connect information. But I wanted to end and start and end with a present and work that I think it's something that for me became important, of thinking of how we are embracing experiences to create new work. So.
I'm clapping. Thank you so much for that talk, Analia. Hello, everybody on the internet. I'm Sharita Town, the program head of the MFA in Visual Studies. And so I think a lot of people out here are standing in applause, and we're really grateful to have you here with us. I'm going to be handling the Q&A, and we have about 4 questions so far from people. So I'm going to go through those. But before I do go through those, I kind of want to respond to just kind of this last bit that you left us with. Early on in your talk, and in the middle, and now at the end again, I've been reminded of one of my most cherished quotes from Violeta Parra, who, when she was in exile in Paris, she was being interviewed as an artist, a multidiscipline artist. And the interviewer asked her, you do textiles, you do sculpture, you paint, you make music, you write poetry, you do all of these things, right? And the interviewer said, if you had to choose one, what would you choose? And Violeta Parra answered, I would choose to be with the people. Like, it's for them that I do this work. And so I kind of want to extend to you a similar question. Like, if you were to kind of take that formula, you do so much, you do video, you're kind of using such interesting intermedia emergent technologies with reading and books, and you're collaborating with writers to even talk about and think through your books, and installation, textile, all these things. What would be the thing that you grasp onto kind of most in such a varied, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary practice?
I think I'll say probably 2 things. Well, first is like I will say that recently I actually learned that I'm an extrovert, something I never knew about myself, which means that I actually get energy from the exchange with others, and so it is about communication. And I think that any of these mediums give me that possibility to communicate. Like I said, I think that my ideas are limited, and that's why I kind of showed in the mapping at the beginning. They're limited. They're that pretty much the same. And I think that this is almost like having conversations with people at different times in different ways, and trying to. I think that is always sort of the challenge, right? That then that's why I'm interested in language. That is like we're constantly trying to overcome the impossibility of communicating or find different ways of doing it. And I think that any of those mediums gives me that. But I'm also obsessed. I think that because my initial background was in more three-dimensional sculptural work, with this idea of transformation throughout time. So if even if it is a more sort of a classical material like wood or stone or whatever, or like video, for me that idea of the when it's expanded throughout time and how that gets transformed is what I'm really interested in. So
sure. Thank you for that answer. One of the first questions that we got kind of in the middle part of your lecture was a question around how this work might help. I'll read the actual question. It says, how does this work help solve issues surrounding homelessness? And I'm not sure in what particular sense this question was posed in regarding homelessness, but it does make me think of diaspora and displacement and all these things that you're experiencing and sussing out in your work and material. So yeah, how would you answer that? How would you say that your work might solve some issues around not feeling like one has a home, or might be physically displaced or geographically displaced from a place of origin?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I don't think that as an artist I can solve any problems. I think that I think it's a privileged position, and the privilege for me is actually asking questions. And so I mean, I did struggle for many years, and I was asked because I have collaborated with design projects, and I have a design background, and my work has been part of projects in architectural situations, and so it was always this question. I was like, oh, are you an artist or a designer? And I did struggle with that for a while, but it became very clear to me when I realized that I don't solve problems, and that's why I don't think as a designer. And I do think that the role that art has for me is to actually put a magnifier lens into issues. So that's I think it's more about like raising awareness of certain things. And hopefully I'm interested in the idea of the personal, and I always start with incredibly personal experiences to be able to communicate to others, and thinking that could expand into a collective experience, that the other ones can actually feel at home with their experience. And it has to be open enough for that to happen. Yeah, so I think that's kind of how I see the role of the work that I do in relationship to others.
Super, thank you for that. Another question that we have kind of here in this kind of little docket going on. Somebody wrote, you said you were a graphic designer by trade. Do you create videos such as this, or do you hire someone to help you? So I think it's also, a question of how much do you do yourself? How much work do you share with others? I'm expanding the question. And, in that process, kind of, I'm curious to know which ideas might happen through that generation and that collaboration and soundboarding, and how much is really just a kind of delegation.
Like I said, I usually start with concepts and ideas, and I find the right material, the right medium in order to communicate them. When I started the video animations, I knew absolutely nothing about animation, literally. And so I ended up actually hiring a colleague at Pratt, where I teach, to teach me. She's an animator, and so I hired her to teach me animation. And then, so I learned the basics, but I was still not capable of making what I thought it was artwork for me at the time. So I actually, the first video I did, I hired somebody, and they were doing it with me right next to them. So it was literally a conversation all the time. I was, what I did was I did all the sound work. So I had all the words and the stories. I write what I call the script, were the words. I do that myself, but then I also collaborate with sound designers, because I'm not a musician or a sound designer. And so I do the basic layout and I do the rhythm. For me, it's important that they follow a certain rhythm and there's a certain environment or mood for each of the videos. But then I hired somebody that actually knows exactly how to do it. You know, the technical part is very important. And in the last piece, for example, that I did, the digital haikus, I now I know, it's been many years, so now I know a lot more about animation. But I start each of them with drawings. So they're literally drawings with pencil and paper. And then I do hire people to do the tracing of the drawings. Because one of the things that happens with animation is like it's such a detail-oriented and time-consuming medium that I need the freedom to and the distance, the emotional distance with the work, to know when it's not right. And if I put 100 hours into something, I feel like I would not be able to say, no, this whole section has to get out. And so I use it for that way. So it's been shifting. The relationship that I have with others have been shifting. But I think that for me, it's important to know the technique, to know exactly how it works, and use it, like I said, you know, to think of how to use it as a language. And but I think that the work needs precision, and I'm very happy to acknowledge my inability to get to certain places. So
Great. I think one of the questions that is a nice piggyback to what you're talking about now comes from one of our students. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. In your experience of going through shifts in your creative practice, like from graphic design to contemporary art, different mediums, etc., what leads you to choose a direction that is divergent from the path that you've been on?
Apart from some, I guess that some attention deficit disorder that I might have, I'm always interested in something that I don't know. I mean, I think that I always look for challenges, and, you know, trying to, again, like, I think that the idea of translation is a very important component in the work. And I think that also this idea of the outsider and what is inside and trying to understand, it's always been the force behind a lot of the things that I'm doing. And you know, like this new series that I'm doing, when I'm like, I'm trying to understand what's the code, like what is the space that we're living in now. And I just, you know, and thinking about what becomes relevant for me at the time, you know, and to, again, like, process that through my body. I really work very much from very personal experiences, and then try to see how that gets synchronized with what is happening. And so all the other works that I'm showing, like the inner compass, the one at the beginning, you know, and a few other projects that I have going on are speaking of this unique situation that we have now about dislocation or displacement, or, you know, physical distance. And although they have been topics that, you know, I've been dealing with for a very long time, but it's a new way of, you know, thinking about them.
Thank you. All right, let's see, another question here we have. More specifically, can you talk about your process with working with language learning audiobooks, or kind of talk through just what sparked that and how you nerded out there, basically?
Yeah, no, it was actually, it's a very interesting story, because when I first came to New York, I finished grad school and I needed to find a job. And so somebody told me that there was an Argentinian musician that was coming to New York once a year. He was making a lot of money and then going back to Argentina to play his guitar. And I was like, oh, I want that job. And so he actually was a Spanish interpreter in the court system. And so I asked him to train me. And it was very interesting because he's a musician. So for him, the audio part was very easy. For me, it was impossible because I'm a visual person. So I had to develop a whole system to be able to retain sound and language and information. Because I was also in the court system where I couldn't write any of this information or what was happening because it was private information. So I had to develop a code system for me that the court allowed. And I started to realize all the experiences and what the exchange that I was having with these people in the court in relationship to language, right? Like they felt incredibly close to me. They started trusting me, although I was actually working for the government. So they couldn't trust me because whatever they were telling me, I had to, say to them. And, it created this very strange place of a certain level of invisibility that I think that also as a foreigner, as an outsider, I was also experiencing. So I started to, like I said before, thinking that language was a very powerful tool to acknowledge all these notions of displacement and that I was having. And so that's how I, going through that experience, that's how I started buying language learning audiobooks. And I was literally editing word by word, and I created this crazy library of words. And then I was just writing with the words, combining them and rewriting stories. So from a technical point of view, that's what happened. I realized I, was doing research all the time. Usually I do a lot of research for each of the projects. That's why I work really, really slowly. Each of those 10-minute videos usually take me about 2 years to make. And so I bought language learning audiobooks for all kinds of trades that you can imagine. So there are language learning audiobooks for nurses, there are language audio books for jail facilitators, and they all have different words, different tones, different enunciations. But I was really interested in also like this idea of teaching and learning and how there were commands and also this, for me, also, there was a very interesting way of dealing with accent because it's supposed to be neutral. And so they have all this very strange political side to it that I find it very interesting. And it became a very rich place to explore. And I'm actually continuing with them. I'm writing another video animation. So that was a trilogy, and then it has another element to it that I called something between a prologue and an epilogue that I'm working on. So for a very thorough question.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna take a pause from some of the queued questions and kind of respond to some of that and some of my own experiences of that trilogy right now in the context of this talk and seeing it through a computer. There were moments, I speak 5 languages. Spanish is one of the languages I speak. And I studied abroad and worked in Chile, and I studied abroad and worked in the south of Spain. And thinking about space and travel and, being a certain bodied and gendered person in another place that, as an ambiguously mixed person, the kinds of experience, but clearly Black or of African descent, just the kind of relationship between learning a language through an audiobook or learning a language in these kinds of more institutional ways or even corporate type of ways versus learning a language in the street. And it takes me back to your initial lecture image of a bird and the kinds of places of, kind of feeling safe and how certain language that you might learn or ways that you learn language might feel safe or unsafe. And so there are certain places in that experience where it did feel very much, it reminded me of being a solitary woman or femme-bodied person, confused or kind of thrust about in a culture, in a context I don't quite understand, but I'm trying to learn. And I'm also looking at the choices of a red line and kind of the way that it moves through space and thinking of the color red as different across cultures, but often dealing with the feminine or dealing with different one of my collaborators here in the studio is from India, and her relationship with red is quite different than mine, especially as a graphic designer. And, you know, here using red can also be more nationalistic or whatever. So this is a very rambly thing, just to say, I didn't know, even though I had so many questions about that piece, I didn't want to ask specific ones because I didn't want to give away secrets, or you know, you thinking about inclusion and exclusion in that language and what's accessible. I'm just wondering if you can kind of talk through what parts of that work you do, or what parts of that work are inspired by more gendered experiences, being, you know, in diaspora or traveling, as well as parts of that work that you are important that they remain secret, and parts of the work that you're excited that other people might understand or know the codes of.
I feel that I try to navigate a level of ambiguity that way. I think that clearly the gender part comes from my way of making the work, right? And but I think that I mean, I showed little excerpts, right, that they're 10. So like even the one that is like, I call it Inland 2, which is like Little Red Riding Hood, the idea of a passage of a rite of passage, you know, it is being questioned at different moments for different reasons. But what I did do in the trilogy, actually one video, the first one, they're only male voices. The second one are only female voices, and the third one is a combination of the two. And that's why I also thought about them in as a trilogy, right? And that's kind of usually the way I work, which is like, yes, you can have an experience with one, but the whole context of it changes as it is in relationship to the other ones. And I, like I said again, I think that I became interested in fairy tales because they exist within the home. I think that also because these are iconic fairy tales that they speak of human experience, and they have been translated, you know, throughout history to, you know, incredible amount of languages and, you know, traditions. And I think of them almost as very soft battle zones, but they're not. I don't find that they're, you know, they're stuck in one idea of what each of these stories are about. I think of them more, as I said, of springboards to start thinking and questioning, you know, cultural mores and, you know, traditions and mandates and, you know, all that stuff that a fairy tale will bring, more than being, you know, just another fairy tale. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
answers my very long question. I appreciate that answer. I'm going to go back to reading. So another question that we have here is it's kind of a weird one. Do you ever feel bound by the gestures you've become known for?
Wow, that's an interesting question. Yes. No, I mean, I was actually talking to someone recently where I said I do have a problem with labels, right? And I think in terms of where we're making, you know, things or how we're making things, and but it's not necessarily a problem for me. I feel that, you know, I always try to think about it as and I always admire artists' careers, that they're, you know, you look at it in the long run, right? Like they're not a speed race, they're a marathon, right? And so yeah, I try not to focus that much on that, you know, and, you know, develop thicker skin and, you know, just move on. But it's a challenge. So, yeah. But I usually, when the other thing is, like, not every single work that one makes gets, you know, goes out of the studio, right? So usually when I'm ready to share something is because I feel like I can go back to sleep with it having its own life. So that's the way I deal with that. You know, maybe I think that that's a better answer to that question. Yeah.
Super. Let's see, another question here. This is from the one of my prior questions about working with other folks, and also I think thinking about working in different media. Somebody wrote, sort of going off Sharita's question, in the past, has there been a medium that you really connected with that has made you feel fulfilled? Or is it more the interaction of your audience with your work? So going back to that extrovert idea.
I would say that I remember things that people have said more than my own. I mean, if I have to choose something now, I will choose what I'm doing now. Like I'm, you know, always thinking that what I'm making now, what I'm thinking, and the next project is going to be the best one, right? That's usually the way that I experience them. But I do remember feedback from people that I think that it becomes for me, you know, it gives meaning to what I'm doing. Like I always remember people when I was making the wall interventions of the tiles, people were telling me that they were always looking if there was somebody behind looking at them touching. And I always remember that, right? Because it's like this idea of this little gestures coming out of the wall triggered, you know, this idea of being watched, this idea of something that is, you know, like I said, culturally dirty or whatever that is, you know, it's like, and so I was fascinated by that, you know, by people's reaction. And that actually for me is like an incredible source and an inspiration to think about what's next. And I keep those voices in my head all the time when I'm making work. So
here's another kind of more philosophical question based off some of the metaphors I think that you provided in your lecture. Do you ever feel like you've fully observed the iceberg or an iceberg? Like you showed us that slide. Do you ever feel like you ever actually fully get this kind of glimpse or even subterranean glimpse in the work and the meanings?
Well, I actually, I recently, I also said to someone else, I said, I think that I have an incurable obsession with seeing the sea in a drop of water, and which is similar but differently to the idea of the iceberg, right? And so I think that that's also why I make art. Right. I think that there's something that the unknown and what I cannot see or fully reach is actually the drive for me, and to see how far I can go, and to even I'm interested in that idea. It's like, you know, what the drive to try to get to somewhere, even if you know that it's not, you know, that it's impossible. And I think that as humans, we constantly develop those mechanisms, like grammar, like bookcases, like we're constantly trying to create order for the chaos that we live in. And I'm interested in that that kind of intention, right? And that push-pull, you know, kind of experience of living. So, yeah.
Super. Here we have, let's see, I'm looking at two different screens for some of these questions that are coming in here. Another question we have here is, do you consider yourself a space shaper or a shape spacer?
Wow. Okay. Say it again.
Yeah, I will say it again. Are you, Analia Segal, a space shaper, or are you a shape spacer?
Well, I think that interestingly enough, we're all both all the time, right? And that's why I'm interested in this idea of rubbing, right? That it's you know, both things get transformed. Some things are more evident than others, right? And that's why I showed the image of, you know, the marble, you know, steps, or, you know, the door handles, that is like, that is being transformed at a very low pace, you know, but our bodies are constantly being transformed. We're just not necessarily acknowledging them, you know, unless, you know, 10 years go by and you run into somebody, you know, and they don't recognize you, and then you're like, oh my God, what happened? So I'm interested in that, kind of experience of, I think that I can, I know that something is happening. I'm not, we're not the same. And so, yeah, I think I probably consider myself both. And I'm, and again, like for me, the important thing is the dialogue and the conversation, right? So if I enter a space, I want to be in dialogue with what is there. I don't want to, either consume the space. I think I'm interested. Recently, I was rereading this book by Lucy Irigaray, the Belgium Spanish philosopher, and I'm interested in the idea of the exchange with things as subjects and not as objects to being consumed. So, I think that it's more of a loving relationship with the environment that I'm interested in creating. So, yeah.
That's very sweet. I liked that. That's nice. I think we have a hand from Elizabeth Arzani, who read your or presented you at the beginning of this lecture. Are you there, Elizabeth?
I am. Can you hear me?
Okay, go for it.
All right. So I'm so impressed by just the breadth of work and material and concepts thinking about architecture and home. And I was interested if there are any other aspects about architecture or the home that are kind of like in the back of your mind or that you're excited about. And this is actually kind of a two-part question that might be connected. And kind of connected to that, are there any materials that you are also excited about that you haven't actually used? Because you've used so much that I'm just interested, is there anything like kind of you're excited to explore?
Well, I mean, in my training or my education in both art and design, it was interesting because in Argentina, people learn how to make art or going through artist studios. And so I literally went through all these different places to learn how to work in different materials. And then I had this silent mandate from my family of having a formal education. And at the time, the art school was incredibly conservative. Now it's a little better, but at the time it was a place that I did not feel that it was right for me. And so that's why I ended up studying graphic design for my bachelor's degree, but it was hosted through the School of Architecture. And I'm actually the first generation of graphic designers in Argentina. And so the limits between the disciplines were incredibly blurry. And actually my teachers at the time were people that didn't have any degree necessarily, that they were all either studied architecture or they were like, just starting to work in industrial design or graphic design or clothing design or whatever it was, because that's what the work that they were making, but they didn't have any specific training in it. So I always felt that freedom. And then I think that's one of the things that why I feel like going through different mediums and, or processes is I find it kind of a free experience. Like I never felt that there was such a big division. But there was another part to your question. The materials that I haven't tried. I think I have a long list. I'm waiting for the right opportunity. So one of the things that has shaped a lot of my way of making work was actually knowing how to live in the city, quite honestly. And so I started to think about three-dimensionality in very different ways. And that's why I started the wall, installations, or this idea of appropriation or interventions, and, using molds, and, the possibility of using architecture in dialogue, what I was doing. So my work was not being forced to become small because I didn't have space. I didn't have the studio. And then, so like I tried to take each of these, like I said, personal experiences and actually find ways around it. I always love, recently I was reading this writer who said, be your own weed, so I think that idea of interspace things, that it's like when you have weed growing in between tiles, right, that nobody can stop that. And I'm interested in that energy and what happens when like you have constraints and you have problems as an artist, but you just like, you know, find different ways of doing it. And I think that that's how I try to navigate those possibilities. So if I, you know, if I had the right funding, the right place, I'll make it happen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was a great last question. And that was a great last answer. I feel like in this Q&A, we got so many, because we're all on computers, a bunch of digital haikus that we will get to kind of carry with us, little gems. And I can't wait to show my students that weren't able to make it this recording and engage with them about so much of what you're working on. I think they're also thinking through and working through. So we're really grateful to have you. It's very late, I think, where you are. Is that correct? What time is it?
11:00 p.m. Yes.
Yes, I hope that you have wonderful rest. What's that?
Past my bedtime.
Exactly. Good night. I hope you have great rest, and thank you for staying up for with us. And good night, everybody else. It was wonderful. Thank you.
It was great. Thanks so much for the